Darkness Dwells is brought to you by Crystal Lake Publishing. Go to crystallakepub.com and go check out what they've got going. They've been publishing since 2012, and they are only getting bigger. They have published the likes of Ramsey Campbell, Mercedes Yardley, and Clive Barker, amongst many more. We're also supported by audible.com. Go to audibletrial.com/darknessdwells and pick out any book that you want when you sign up for a free trial membership. And that trial lasts for 1 month and you get any book you want for free. So go and check that out. Welcome to the Darkness Dwells podcast, episode 113. I am Jason White.
I'm Michael Schutz. Coming at you.
And this week, just before we get into anything, we're talking with Ladies of Horror Fiction podcast host Toni, and we are going to discuss the recent Leprechaun film. So how you doing, Michael?
I'm just fine.
Where's me cold?
Oh, but I believe you have a story for us.
Well, yeah, I cut my finger at work. I was really sick. I was like feverish, and I had the back door issue really bad, and I just wasn't with it, right? So I was cutting something, and my finger got in the way without me really noticing, and I took off a nasty chunk of skin. It didn't come off all the way. It was just like one giant flap, and it took 7 stitches to fix it up. And that was a lot of fun. The reason why I wanted to tell this story is because you mentioned body horror when we were talking about this just before before I hit record. And when I watch a movie, and the movie we're going to be talking about is actually pretty gory, I have absolutely no issues with watching gory stuff. There's only a couple of times when I've been absolutely repulsed. But when it's my body, because when the doctor came in to stitch it up, he was like, "Oh man," he had this like alcohol soaked like a pad, right? And he's like wiping it really hard, and the flap is like it's a flap of meat and skin, right? And it's just like flapping all over the place. And then he freezes it, and he sticks the needle right into the wound itself, which I guess they're supposed to do.
No way!
Holy fuck, did it hurt. It hurt so bad. And then, I couldn't... the thing that's surprising me here, though, is that I couldn't watch. I was absolutely repulsed. And it's not that big of a wound, really. It's like maybe 2 inches at the biggest. And probably about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches. But I couldn't watch him do any of that. I was absolutely repulsed, and it was like making me feel faint and grossed out. I've never had to deal with a wound of my own like that, like where I could like stare at it and watch it like that. So it was an interesting reaction on my own part. It was a strange reaction too. I could not watch. I had to keep my hand over my eyes. And I had my cell phone down.
Yeah, personal horror is different.
Yeah, it is. And it's just, like I said, just a little wound. But when it was on my body, I was absolutely repulsed. I couldn't handle it.
Well, and you had to feel things, which that adds a lot, I think, right?
Yeah. It's weird because when it's frozen, you can't feel it all. I couldn't feel the whole finger. But I could feel the stitches being pulled through the skin. I can't explain it. It's I guess it's like a pressure thing, but you could feel it. It didn't hurt. Yes. It was just like you just feel it kind of going through the skin. weird.
Yeah, I know that experience because the shot dulls the pain receptors, but you still have some tactile sensation. So yeah, you can feel things going on, but it doesn't hurt. Weird, man.
It's very strange.
Like I just wanted to kind of piggyback on that, talking about like gore and everything. Like horror movie gore is absolutely fine. You know, I can watch stuff in horror movies like Saw and Hostel, you know, like torture and shit like that. But if it's in a drama setting, it's different.
Like where it's more serious? Like
yes, where you kind of know the people more, because you know in horror movies you get the sense that they're not like actually in pain. They just kind of scream, and it's more like a reaction. You know, they're screaming and there's lots of blood and everything. But then you get into like a drama or a thriller, and they're, you know, they captured somebody and they're torturing him, and it's the setting is different and my reaction is different. It hits me harder.
I kind of understand what you're talking about, because I had that same reaction with Schindler's List. That movie, I just can't watch. I mean, I could watch it if it wasn't in a concentration camp, and if it was maybe not taken quite so seriously. But because it was taken so seriously...
if it was a madman, you know, capturing people and doing things, it's completely different.
Yeah, but in this setting, it's just awful to watch. It's torture to watch, because it's heartbreaking what you're watching. It's almost like you're watching the real thing, I guess. It's awful.
Yeah.
And yet I can watch war movies. I don't get that, but
yeah,
I guess everyone's participating.
I get completely. I understand completely. Well, I don't understand completely, but I feel the same way.
Yeah.
Which is one thing. I was reading Survivor.
Oh yeah.
By Gonzalez. That was too much. That was outrageous.
Really?
It's basically about making snuff films, you know, from the point of view of the captured. And it got to this one section, and what did it was, there's like, so there were the people that were captured. There's the guy with the camera, there's the guy doing the torture, and then there's like the producer guy. And so the scene halfway through the book, the producer guy throws up. He like throws up twice.
Yeah.
And that's what got me, was that this character who had been around it so much was so sickened by what happened that he threw up. He couldn't take it. For some reason, that made it so real to me that I just, that was really disgusting.
That's funny. So that book really affected you.
Yes. Yeah.
I've heard stories about that book.
It's like 5 stars, 1 star. He did a really outstanding job. That was well executed. Just a fantastic job.
Like, well done.
It's not
sir.
something that I recommend to people. I can't recommend it unless you're a total gorehound.
Yeah. And don't mind that kind of subject matter.
Yeah. Yeah, you gotta be ready.
You gotta be into the snuff stuff. Ugh.
Yeah.
That's like my worst nightmare. I think I've shared that. I have this fear of waking or being knocked out somewhere. I'm just like walking down the street, and then I wake up in a torture room with cameras or something.
I couldn't take it either. I couldn't take it. It's like a full blown phobia for you, but it's a fear of mine too. I just when I watch those scenes in movies, I'm like, God, I would never last.
Yeah, neither would I.
If I were a spy, I would spill the information so quickly that the bad guys wouldn't believe me. They think you gave that up too fast.
Yeah, I wake up in that room and they're like, we have some questions for you, and then they pull out their little tool set there. Once I see that tool set, I'm like, all right,
pencil.
All right, I know where this is going.
Yep. Whatever you want to know, I'll tell you.
I will give you names. I will give you their insurance numbers if I can. Their social insurance numbers.
Totally.
All right, so
Oh,
as I said, this week we talk with. We're sort of, I guess, rounding up a series that I never really announced. It was like a Women in Horror celebration that we did, and of course it bled into March, and it sort of went later than I planned. This episode's coming out like 2 weeks late because of everything that was going on. And, but this is the last for a little while. Of course, we're going to continue having women horror writers on, but I just wanted to help out making women in horror a little more, people a little more aware, because there's people out there who don't even know that women write horror, which is just kind of funny from my standpoint, because, I'm like neck deep in looking at books and stuff all the time, but not everyone is. So hopefully
and some people aren't aware that there's a problem with people. They're not aware that other people have a problem with women in horror. Does that make sense?
Yes, because there are some people out there.
Important too. Not just waking people up that they write, but waking people up that there are people that have a problem with it.
Yes, actually, Toni and we discussed that fairly a lot. So stay tuned for that, and no relation whatsoever to the conversation at hand, but we also decided to watch Leprechaun Returns.
God.
And so we're going to take a quick break, and when we return, we're going to dig right in.
Yes.
And
come back for me, pot of gold.
I hit record about 4 minutes ago because it's pretty natural, and I think we're going pretty good here, so I thought we'd just start from there. But before we continue with this part, how about we back up just a little bit, and how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and, where you grew up, and how did you come to read horror?
Okay, all right. My name's Toni. I am a co-founder, or I am a founding member, I should say, of the Ladies of Horror Fiction. I write for Horror After Dark. I write for the Ladies of Horror Fiction blog as well, and I write for my own blog, The Misadventures of a Reader. I grew up in Arizona, particularly Tucson. For the latest, I lived there forever. I left. I went overseas with my grandmother, and I came back after she passed, and my parents started to need some help. So I came back over here, and I grew up here in the desert in the heat.
Awesome. I kind of envy you for that, just for the dry heat. I live in central Ontario in Canada, and it gets very humid here in the summer. Obviously not in the winter, but it gets like jungle-like here, and you're just covered in sweat even if you don't move. And I hate that.
Yeah, I spent about 10 years, 11 years in England, and I know humidity. It's it's so gross though. Like you're just like
I feel like a slug
because you get out of the right, and you get out of the shower and you want to like dry off, but your towel is kind of it doesn't feel like it's dry.
Yeah, that's so true. So how did you get into horror? How did you start reading horror? What introduced you?
Horror. I've read horror most of my life. My grandmother was Irish, and she used to tell me these wonderful stories about fairies and brownies, and they weren't always necessarily nice stories. And, I grew up thinking that fairies were not good people, and, they were going to steal me away and make me a changeling. In the first horror story I read, I was actually in kindergarten. And I had checked this book out of the library at school, and it was Halloween Tales or something like that. And there was a story about a child in there, and the child got stolen in their sleep by fairies. And yeah. And so I was actually absolutely petrified after I read the story. And I ended up, we had a grandfather clock in the hall, and I would sit there and I would make sure I could hear the ticking because I was absolutely frightened of fairies coming to take me away. And it just kind of grew from there. The first like adult horror book I ever read was like the Tommyknockers by Stephen King. And I think I was like in 5th grade. Mm-hmm. So it's always been a part of who I am. It's pretty much a part of like everything most of the things I read are dark speculative fiction or horror or something of that nature. And it's just kind of who you are, especially if you grow up in a household where they want you to read. So they're shoving books at you. Oh, it's supposed to be scary. I don't care. You can read it,
You'll enjoy it. You'll like this one.
Yeah. I was that child that always had scary stories to tell in the dark. The 3 book series, I would have them on rotate, checking them out of the library. So I've always read horror. And then, I got into horror movies probably end of primary school, into middle school. I was like, watching The Exorcist and all that stuff. And, it's just always who I've always been. I've never been into any other like real genres of literature. I do read classics and stuff, but it's not always been a constant with me, and horror has always been a constant, whether it's a movie, whether it's TV, whether it's books, it's always been there. And that's kind of just who I am. It's part of my identity, I guess.
How long have you been writing? You mentioned you write for 3 blogs. When did you start writing blogs?
I started blogging last year. I'm kind of a newer blogger. But it kind of grew. It grew really quickly. I started just kind of blogging things that I already had. Well, no, I started blogging in 2017. It's 2019, right? So I've been blogging for 2 years. I started out just blogging books that I have, and I was like, I had read and things like that. And then I started kind of reaching out to publishers, and then the vice versa started happening. Once you really kind of start getting your stuff out there as a blogger, you have the opportunity to have publicists, contacting you and authors contacting you to review their works. And I've been really lucky. I am very early on in my blogging career. I ended up beta reading for a couple of wonderful people. And so I've been really fortunate, to be perfectly honest with you. I know there's smaller bloggers out there that haven't had a lot of the opportunities that I've had. So I've been really, really lucky and very fortunate to get some of the opportunities that I've had.
Yeah. Now, you've also, pretty much the reason why we're here, you helped organize the Ladies of Horror Fiction. I was wondering who's all involved in that, and how did the Ladies of Horror Fiction come to be?
So the co-founders of the Ladies of Horror Fiction are Jen from Book Den, Lillian from Sci-Fi and Scary, and Lori from Books Nonsense. We were the 4 founding members that kind of started it. We were working on another project together, and we all found we really, really, really got along really well, and we saw this need for women's horror fiction to get kind of promoted, to be perfectly honest with you. We see on Twitter or whatever, you see a lot of male horror writers, and we were coming across these amazing, brilliant women that were writing horror that weren't getting the same type of publicity that men were. And we thought that was interesting and kind of ran with it. And it's been amazing, to be perfectly honest with you. I work with an amazing group of women, and Alex from Finding Montauk. So the people that are actually involved in the whole group is, so I mentioned the 4 core founding members. There's Emily from Book Happy. She's a very, very prolific Instagrammer. She's on Twitter as well as Goodreads, and she's amazing. She can take a picture of a book and make it look really cool. She's so cool. We've got Tracy Reeds, and she works with Lillian on Sci-Fi and Scary, so she blogs there. And then there's Finding Montauk, or Alex from Finding Montauk, and he's just a lovely guy. And then there's Kat from Red Lace Reviews, and she's based out of England. She's based out of Northern Ireland, I believe. And we just all kind of came together. We pulled people in that we had been working with on this other project, that, we all have these skills that, you kind of moosh them together, and it just works really, really well.
Yeah. Now, what are some of the activities you all do in order to help raise awareness of women horror writers?
So we review a lot of women horror writers' books. We also have this thing, and it's huge, and it's a really big project, and it's an ongoing project. So it's not even close to being complete. It's called the LOHF Directory, and it is a listing of. Huge. I think the last time I counted, it's huge. It's ginormous. Yes. It is just huge.
I've used it. I've had to use it actually a few times for research for other podcast episodes.
It's huge, and it's still growing. We still get, even today, we still get requests to be added to it. So it's growing. That's an amazing thing. And we are working through each writer as we go, and we're trying to add a profile to them. So they're not just a name, click on this name, but we're trying to add a profile to each one of them so that, people can look at their works and they can see them and they can say, oh yeah, okay, so this sounds interesting, and they can click there and go and buy it or get it from their local library or whatever. So that's one of the things that we do. We do read-alongs. We do 4 a year, and this is a new one. We just got done doing the Between by Tenerife Dew. We just got done reading that in February. Yeah, February. Yep. So, and the one that we did before that was Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. So we do 4 of those a year. We do this big, huge discussion on them. Like on each of the books, we ask questions in a group chat that we all have. And, we all take turns answering them. And then Jen puts together these amazing blog posts that talks about what we thought about the book, or, answering these questions. So it's really fun, and it kind of brings the community together. We've been really, really fortunate because people are really interested in what we're doing right now. And a lot of the women horror writers are very interested in it as well, because, I'm trying to think of a best way to put it. I think there's a lot of women out there that are writing, especially horror, that we're still getting that type of stigma of, well, like, why are you writing horror, or why do you read horror? It's kind of that thing where, you don't like the super extreme. So, it's just this weird dichotomy that's in, and I think it's like within what would be considered primarily like male type things, like sci-fi. Lillian loves hard sci-fi. She doesn't like soft sci-fi. She loves hard sci-fi. And so we see this weird dichotomy. So we're trying to break through that with the read-alongs. We just did a readathon too in February, where, we give you prompts. Okay, well, you have to read a book that's short, a book by this type of author, this type of author, this type of author. And so we do that. We review primarily women horror writers. Actually, we review only women horror writers on LOHF. So we're constantly doing that. We're trying to reach out to some more of the women that work in the horror industry, to do some collaborations or something like that. And then, we have the podcast where I get to talk ad nauseum about whatever I feel like. Yeah. So with that, I get to pick a topic, and I get to talk about the topic and how it affects women, and, not necessarily how it affects women or how women have played into that. So the 2-part podcast that I'm working on right now is about witches. And and it's not just the Salem witch trials, but like witches throughout time. So it's a really, really big episode. And then what I try to do is I try to pair each episode with books, horror books written by women. And we talk about, things that we're doing, any type of opportunities for women in the horror industry, anything like that. So, we try to promote as much as possible. Twitter, Instagram, our blog, and it goes back to our own personal blogs as well, because most of my reviews go on my personal blog and then they go on to the LOHF blog. And then what with the reviews, it's not just me reviewing a book. It's like 2 or 3 of us that have a review of that book, so that there's a good mix of opinions.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about perhaps the dark thing. Something like this is going to bring out the jerks. So
absolutely,
there are some male horror writers out there that probably feel threatened, like, oh no, they're never going to make it now, or they're not going to become the famous writer they always wanted to be because women are wanting to take over, some such bullshit. You see these kind of snide remarks all the time on social media, especially around February, which is Women in Horror Month. And this year, one such fellow said the typical, you see this every goddamn year, a post where they're like, when's it going to be Men in Horror Month? And, this time, the guy who did that, he got pretty much torn to pieces for it. But, this has happened other years previous and nobody would really pay attention to it. But this year, this guy got totally ripped apart. But,
good.
So I was wondering if you've gotten much backlash for this. And
actually,
if so,
we have.
How do you respond to it?
So we have gotten a lot of backlash, and it's really weird because, I get with the political climate that people, some people would get, irritated by, hey, another group promoting whatever, an agenda. And the problem is that, we're not doing that. And that's the whole thing. We're just taking a group of people who we truly believe are underappreciated within the genre and just kind of pushing their work out there more. But I can't tell you the amount of comments that we get, like, about how, women would be appreciated if they could write horror.
That's horrible.
I saw that like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was like, you are such an ass.
Yeah.
And, it's hard. It's a very fine line to walk, as well, because we're trying to remain very positive, like a very positive organization and positive in what we do, because, there is, we just want to be positive, because there's so much negativity out there in the world in general. So, we're trying to continually be positive, but you might notice that, when certain comments come up, that we do go and we comment and we push, and, we're not quiet about it.
Yeah.
We're not quiet about it, because you can look at any of the statistics, and at the very first episode of the podcast, the LOHF podcast, I went through some statistics that are widely available from the HWA, the Horror Writers Association. And, the amount of women that are writing horror is increasing. But you still look at the best of, whatever year, stick a year in there, and it's men.
Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
There's women writing, and that's the point. And that I'm taking that's the point of your organization or your website, your blog there, is to sort of educate people like, hey, women are here too, and they're writing horror, and it's okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
It's that stigma that, you get growing up. Oh, well, you shouldn't really read that. That's not really for girls. We're not supposed to be these, we're not supposed to be into the dark and the spooky and the scary and the this and the that. And, the thing of it is that a good chunk of us are,
Yeah.
And when you're brought up, I was lucky. I was not given that stigma. You know, I was who I was. My parents were cool with it. My friends were cool with it, whatever. But there are women out there who are writing and who I've spoken to personally where, you know, their families didn't want them reading horror. Yeah. Which absolutely blows me away, you know, and they kind of kept it like on the down low. And women horror writers out there who are being told or who have been told, oh, well, you're too pretty to write things like that. And I'm like, you got to be shitting me. It's 2019, folks.
Yeah.
It's 2019. Women write. Women, I have, you know, I've primarily read women for the last 6 months. And I read a lot of diverse horror because I love diverse horror. There was an anthology that I read not too long ago by Dark Moon Books. As a matter of fact, it was edited by Eric Guarg, I think is his last name. And it was called The World of Horror. And it was amazing. It was horror that from all over the world, like South Africa, China. I think there was one from like Thailand, Philippines, and women and men were writing. And it just blew me away. But anyways, you know, I think that we've gotten locked into this, okay, well, Stephen King puts out 2 books a year. Let's read those.
Yeah.
Or, Peter Straub puts out a book a year or whatever. You know what I mean? It's this dichotomy that we're constantly being put into. And women write some horrible crap. I mean, horrible, gruesome, you know, rip your guts out, punch you in the face horror. Yeah. And I mean, some of the best horror I've read in the last 6 months have been written by women.
Yeah. For sure.
Just absolutely I mean, The Rust Maidens by Gwendolyn Keist just blew me away.
Yeah,
absolutely blew me away.
Speaking of Gwendolyn Keist, this February introduced me to her work. I was reading The Rust Maidens when I decided, you know, I'm going to have this woman on the show because this book is blowing me away. And I went and read her collection, and I was just floored. Yes. Like, holy cow, this is a powerful writer. How did she pass my radar until now?
And like Untether, so her collection Untether, I read the first story and it just reduced me to this like blubbering idiot. And she's an amazing writer. She's amazing. You know, you got Gwendolyn Keist, you got, you know, Christy DeMeester, who is amazing as well. If you've read Everything That's Underneath, that collection is just so creepy. Yeah. And it's that creepy that stays with you. It's not like, okay, well, we're going to chop this person's head off or this monster is going to bite somebody and, you know, there you go. It's that really dark and creepy, and it crawls into your stomach and it kind of stays there for a while. Yeah. And, you know, you got Sarah Tatlinger, who is writing these amazing horror poems. Her last collection, her last poem collection that came out was about H.H. Holmes. And I don't know, have you ever heard of H.H. Holmes?
Yes, that the hotel guy.
Yeah, the hotel guy, he's awesome. Well, not that he's awesome. That was really bad what he did. I'm really sorry. I just think it's awesome, like fuel for fodder. You know what I mean? You can just go so many different places with it. And her poem collection was amazing, and it blew me away.
What's
her poem collection,
again?
Love for Sarah Tatlinger.
Tatlinger?
Tantlinger. Tatlinger.
Yeah, I haven't heard that. I want to check that out.
Oh my God, it's amazing. You really should. And Love for Slaughter, her first collection was Love for Slaughter, and that was amazing as well. Excellent. There's nobody that can make murder sound wonderful but her. You know, there's just so many like amazing women writers out there. And again, they're writing this. I read Black Women Magic. Yes, Black Women Magic. And I believe that's what it was called. Hold on, let me check this real quick because I don't want to butcher it. And it was amazing. And it was a whole bunch of writers that I had not ever heard of. And Black Magic Women. And it was edited by Sumiko Salson. And oh my goodness. Some of these stories just blew me away. and it's written by women of color, and it's amazing, and I loved it. And this is the problem is that I've read horror for 30 years, and I've not heard of some of these writers.
Yeah.
That's a problem. That's a major problem as far as I'm concerned. There's also the independent, the independent writers in general. Some of them don't get the attention that they deserve. But yet these are so, some of these stories are amazing. They blew me away.
Yeah, and that's Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that they some of them, like, I'm a big Stephen King fan. I love Stephen King. Most people love Stephen King. But as you were saying before, a lot of people, they refer to Stephen King when they think of horror, and like pretty much nobody else. But a lot of these writers that we're talking about here, you could argue that they're better than what people would normally go to, like Stephen King. And I'm pretty sure Stephen King would probably agree, honestly.
To be perfect, yeah, absolutely. And I know a lot of male indie authors as well, and they're just as, their stuff is amazing as well. But these stories are ones that I wouldn't have ever heard of otherwise.
Yeah, and it's me too. It's like you have to dig in order to find different, more diverse authorship within this genre, and it's, I think, one of the only genres, except for, like there's science fiction where there's not too many women writing or in it, especially the hard science fiction, unless you really look. And horror is pretty much the same way. Fantasy used to be the same, except now it's really changing, especially in adult fantasy or young adult fantasy. There's like a plethora of female writers in that now, which is fine. But I remember when I was a kid, growing up, reading fantasy books, there were women. There was a certain type of kid who read fantasy and horror books, and they were like the geek with the zits and the no friends, and that was
right?
that was me, and no women, no jocks or anyone read that kind of stuff, and you kind of got looked down upon for reading it. Now it's like everyone's reading it.
Absolutely. And that's the thing that I love about reading, to be perfectly honest, is you can come to whatever genre you want, whenever you want, and it's there for you. You know what I mean? You may not have read YA fantasy before yesterday or something, but you've absolutely fallen in love with it. Not my preferred genre, but I have friends that love YA fantasy, so whatever.
Yeah.
I personally, I have this thing for retelling of fairy tales, like dark, nasty, the real fairy tales, and I love fairy tale retellings. It's one of my favorite things in the entire world.
Actually, and I wanted to talk to you about that a little bit, because I listened to your show. And I have since the very beginning, because I'm always crawling on Twitter, and you guys created quite a buzz for this just before everything started up last year. And I'm a podcast addict, so I heard about your show, and I started listening from the first episode. And you've introduced me to some classic horror, women horror writers that I wouldn't have heard of either, like Edith Wharton. So
yes.
I was, I was wondering, like, how much. Actually, let me. So there has been a fair amount of discussion of fairy tales in your show too. So you can really tell that you like fairy tales and the retellings of it. What are your favorite original fairy tales?
My favorite original fairy tales. Oh, I have lots of them. I have lots and lots and lots of them. See, my thing is that I find folklore and fairy tale to kind of intersect with horror. I believe that our horror, most of our horror comes from, something there, like werewolves or whatever. And I have this really cool story I'm going to tell this coming up December. I'm so excited about it. I came across it before last Christmas, and I'm like, oh, I want to tell the story, but I can't yet. So it's on the back burner for this Christmas. But I feel like I love fairy tales. I do. I love the original fairy tales. I have the original fairy tales in multiple different versions from different authors that have done the translations. My favorite, let me think. It's either, this is going to sound so like contrived, but it's either, there's 4 of them. So there's Sleeping Beauty, and the original is horrible and just bad. And I really, Disney completely butchered that whole story. There's Sleeping Beauty, and I really, really loved, Hansel and Gretel because I side with the witch. I'm horrible. If you've listened to my show, you know I've sided with the witch a few times.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I don't like children, people. I do. I love children. I do. But, when they're eating your house that you built, it's not good. And Little Red Riding Hood. And the reason why I love Hansel and Gretel is because of how much the story's changed. And the story's changed because of things that have happened, that are happening in society during that time period. Hansel and Gretel, what most people don't realize in Hansel and Gretel is that it wasn't a stepmother, it was a real mother. Mm-hmm. It was their biological mother that, was telling their dad, hey, you know what, get rid of them and, we'll be able to live for a little bit longer. In Sleeping Beauty, and Sleeping Beauty is horrible, and it's completely different than the Disney story. Yeah. Have you ever read the original Cinderella?
Yeah, a long time ago, and I do remember it being very dark. I mean, most of them are, right? Most of them were very dark and horror stories on their own before Disney got their hands on them.
Yeah, so the thing of it is the Grimm brothers. So the original Grimm brothers writing in 1818 was amazing. It was dark, and it was, the stories that get told around these, these hearths in Germany. And so they put them down on paper, and they're like, okay, well, we're going to put this out in the world, and people loved it. And then, as time goes on, they did a couple different reprintings, and they've changed some of the stories to help with the social times. So with the whole mother stepmother thing, people were dying during that time period because of a famine in Germany. And so they changed it. They're like, okay, well, most people are going to have stepmothers, so we're just going to make the stepmother, bad. And so, it's really interesting. But Sleeping Beauty is just continually blows me away at how horrible that story is. About a princess who is put under a sleeping spell and is basically raped. Yeah. And doesn't wake up until she has twins. And I was just like, oh my God. When I was older and I was reading these original stories. And again, my grandmother didn't hold back either. So she was, again, my grandmother was Irish, so I got to hear lots and lots of stories about changelings. So I've always had this love of either, fairy tale or folklore. And folklore is amazing as well, because fairy tale and folklore, they kind of go hand in hand, and people think they're the same thing, but they're not. And legends, urban legends. I love urban legends too. I'm a freak about this stuff. The whole werewolf thing, the whole werewolf, the first time that a werewolf was mentioned in writing was the Biz Clave, and it was written by a woman. Mm-hmm. It's this massive poem about werewolves, and it was written by a woman. And it's the first time they were mentioned in writing, in literature type writing, but nobody knows about it.
Yeah.
I had never heard of the Biz Clave until I really started doing some research about, women in horror and how long we've been writing horror.
And boom, there it is.
And how long. Yeah, you see this stuff. And it's something interesting that I was talking to Gwendolyn Keist about was, we hear these types of stories from our mothers and our grandmothers. The whole, the folklore and the fairy tale. We hear these stories from mothers and grandmothers, and that's where they tended to come down to us from time, right? And it's such an interesting thing to look at the difference in how men and women write horror. Not everybody. I'm not talking about everybody, but because there's whatever. But it's just interesting. I find that how much folklore and horror intersect it just blows me away.
Yeah.
Because you can sit down and you can read something and you're like, oh my gosh, okay. And you continue to read, but in your head, you're like, wow, that sounds like such and such, or, whatever. It doesn't have to follow like the exact same formula. It could just be about two kids. And you're like, wow, that sounds like Hansel and Gretel.
Yeah. Why do you think Disney, where do you think the shift happened? Because I find this interesting too. Why were the stories once upon a time so dark? See what I did there? And now
saw that. That was good.
And now, Disney came in. Why did they buy it up, or not buy it up, steal it basically, and redo it, retell it, but make it so much more fluffy? Because if you think about when they started doing this, there was less restrictions. Basically, maybe if I got my film history here correct, I don't know if I do, but I guess maybe they had to water it down because of they didn't want to piss people off. But I'm just trying to figure out when did this transaction happen? Why did we start watering down stories? Do you think that maybe if we hadn't done that, we would have maybe turned out differently than where we are now?
So the shift the shift from the watering down of the stories weren't, so this is my understanding, is the stories, once, the Grimm brothers had them, they weren't publishing them for children. They weren't publishing these things for children. So then there was a guy who was in the French court, and I have all this stuff. It's all on my website in the show notes for the LOHF. There was a courtier in the French court who heard these stories, and he went to his father, and his father was was British, and he wrote down these stories that his son heard in the French court, and then he turned around and he published them in the UK. So it was really the shift in the Victorian era that changed the stories completely, because they watered them down for children. And I don't know how that worked, or what. There might have been, well, at the time, during the Victorian era, where the shift was happening, you had this shift of children having a childhood. So prior to that, you had kids just working, right? They didn't. The kids that were from the upper crust went to school and became whatever, and then you still had, most of the majority of people were illiterate. Their children did not really go to school. Mm-hmm. And they all worked. During the Victorian era, we saw a shift in how childhood happened. So we saw a shift in, child's rights. They still worked, but it was different. And so they were pushing for children to have childhoods, and that's when that shift really occurred. And I think that's when that shift, when those stories started to be watered down for children, is when we saw that shift.
Interesting.
And then Disney just kind of ran with it, right? He made the stories. He took them and he made them for children, really. I know that, their first movie, I think it was Steamboat Willie, and that wasn't necessarily aimed at children. But I think, their first animated, what's it called? Fairy tale was Snow White, and that was targeted at children. But there's still themes in it that people today, with today's sensibilities, would be like, ooh, I'm not quite sure about that. So I think it's just a shift. And if we hadn't changed those stories, I think horror wouldn't have the same stigma, maybe, that it does today.
I was just wondering how much research goes into each episode, and how do you pick which writers to cover on your show?
So it takes me normally I have topics in mind and I kind of write them down. I'm like, okay, well, that's because it's something I'm interested in, which is really funny because, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll talk about this or I'll talk about this. But it takes me the one that I'm working on now, I've been researching it for about a month. just because there's so much to cover and there's so much. I want to make sure I get the history right, because I think it's important to understand the history of horror, and how it plays into the whole thing with women, especially like witches, and which is what this episode is going to be on, and it's a two-parter, and I think it's going to be really interesting because I'm looking at how the whole horror genre looks at witches, starting from history forward, and it takes me quite a while. Like fairy tales or whatever, it takes me a couple of weeks to write them. And then because my recording schedule is a little odd, I record really late at night, so my house is quiet. It can take me a couple of days to actually record, and then a day for mixing or whatever. So I know that doesn't sound like a lot for some people, but that it takes a day for mixing. You have headphones on your head all day and you're listening to yourself over and over and over again. And you're taking out like the breaths, the type situations. And you're listening to like, oh my God, you can hear like the AC come on or whatever, and so it takes a lot of time to do it. And it's kind of crazy, but yeah, this one is taking me about a month, and I'm still writing and I'm still researching and stuff, because I write and research at the same time.
Yeah,
but
I really like the information you give, because you give little tidbits. Like, first of all, you've introduced me to writers I would have never heard of otherwise unless I went looking. And but you also give like really interesting, like I mentioned Edith Wharton earlier, and I believe she's the one who you said that she could not read horror or ghost stories herself, but she wrote these like pretty scary books or stories herself. That's just interesting because it scared her so much, but yet she writes this stuff,
That blew me away. Edith Wharton. Yeah, well, Edith Wharton was interesting in and of herself. She was like this badass woman in France, but she was amazing. I love her to pieces. But yeah, she actually had ghost stories burned that were in her library. Yeah, that's because she was so scared of them. And it blew me away. I was like, holy crap, what? Really? And it's really interesting because she had such an interesting, she was an interesting person in and of itself. I mean, she blew me away when I was reading about her, because I knew of her. I've read some of her books, but, just the fact that, you find out all these little bits and pieces. Ooh, sorry about that.
That's all right.
That was my work email.
Happens all the time.
I feel the pain. But no. So yeah, I like to talk about little tidbits of information that people may not know about authors, or about the history of horror, or, different parts of horror, like werewolves. People have this understanding about werewolves, about, whatever, but they don't really understand like where the legend comes from and how it's been morphed over time. Yeah. They don't know the beginning of it, and they don't know like little bits and pieces about werewolves. And there's some really interesting, weird things about werewolves and how that all works. Or vampires, everybody knows that Bram Stoker wrote this book, and, blah, blah, blah. But, there's lots of bits and pieces that go along with that, that it wasn't the first. There's so many bits and pieces, and I like the bits and pieces. It's like the burnt, when you make something and you like have burnt bits on the bottom of the pan. Yeah. Those are the best parts, personally. Yeah, I know it sounds kind of gross, people.
No, I agree with that, honestly. Like when you're cooking lasagna and you get those little burnt pieces of cheese or whatnot. I just love that. Yeah, I totally get that.
Absolutely.
But absolutely. So was the podcast always going to be a part of Ladies of Horror Fiction, or was like when you guys came up with the idea?
Yeah, it kind of, we were talking, so we had been planning and working on the website and stuff like that for about 2 or 3 months prior to actually coming out and saying, hey, folks, we're here. This is what we're doing. So we were working on it for 2 or 3 months prior to that. And the podcast was going to be something that we were always going to do. We wanted to put it out in October. We wanted to start it in October, just because that would give us time to kind of structure it in a way that we liked and make sure that, we could do it, because it's, time constraints. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Time is hard. And, so that was something that we wanted to make sure that we could do. So yeah, it was always there. And it was always something I had wanted to do like all year last year, but I didn't really have an outlet. And I didn't really know what to do. It was something that I had wanted to do. So I went into 2018 thinking, I really, because I listen to podcasts all the time. I am a podcast. I listen to them when I go to bed. Mm-hmm. I work from home, so I listen to podcasts when I'm working, etc. So it's something that I listen to podcasts all the time, and I'm like, I could totally do that. I could sit down and I could do that, but I didn't know what to talk about.
Yeah,
which is really weird. And so I didn't know what to talk about, and then all of a sudden I was like, I had this vehicle, and I was like, oh my God, I can talk about this. This is something I can talk about. Different parts and this and that and blah, blah, blah. And, we were really concerned that we wouldn't have content. You know what I mean? Like, we'd just come to this place where there was no content to talk about. But as I started really digging and doing research and looking at stuff, I was like, oh my God, there is so much content out there. You can take one thing and you can make it work. There's always something there. Like,
you just have to.
Yeah. And that's the thing, and that's been the hard thing, I think, as far as podcasting goes, because it's like there's so much to talk about, and there's so much to. I want to talk about everything, and I want to talk about everything, and I want to talk about things that are interesting, and that's been my big scary thing. I'm going to get out there, I'm going to talk, and nobody's really going to listen to me. And that was like the first episode when I put it out there, I was like, oh my God, what if nobody listens to it? Yeah. And my husband's like, don't worry about it. He's like, you're being creative because, we're, our household is like, be creative. One of my favorite things in the world is Neil Gaiman's speech where he talks about making good art. And that's kind of my family philosophy. My oldest son he's a musician and he sings, and my youngest son doesn't do any of that. He likes to play video games, but my husband, he's a musician. He comes in here and he records and does his thing. So, it's important to have a creative outlet when you're a creative person, but when you put it out there into the world, that's a completely different story.
How is it going to be received? It is, or is it going to be worse? Is nobody going to care?
Well, and that was the thing is that, I really was sitting there going, nobody's going to listen to me talk about this. Nobody's going to. And then my mom listened, and, I had a couple beta listeners listen to the first episode. They're like, this is really good. I'm like, oh, well, thank you. And that was my big thing is I wanted people to listen to it, and not just because of, that it's because I put it out there, but it's because it was it's important to, the LOHF and what we're trying to do to be able to talk about, all these things.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Oh, for sure. Now, have you noticed that you guys made much of an impact? Have you guys been accomplishing what you've set out to do?
Yeah, I think we're seeing, I think that there's an impact. I've been told that we're having an impact, by women horror writers, and, we scream and shout about the books that we love. We're not, quiet on social media about that.
Yeah.
You part of it is the fact that, you have to have cheerleaders. You know what I mean? If you're a writer or you're a creative, you have to have cheerleaders that back you. Especially if to get your work out there, we know thousands of writers, everybody knows tons and tons of writers that have, oh yeah, I wrote a book. Mm-hmm. Oh, awesome. Can I read it? Well, no, I'm not, I'm not too sure, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, come on now, you need to put it out there. But, I think that we're seeing that we've made an impact. I think that we've helped, like, at least push some writers out into the forefront. Hopefully, we can continue to do that with more.
For sure.
But they have to let us know. I mean, but at the same time, if you're there and we don't know about you, let us know. You know what I mean? It's not. I'm not personally. I'm not a mind reader, and I'm pretty sure nobody else is. That would be kind of a scary, scary thing.
You become like the overlord of the whole thing.
Can you believe? I would not want that in any way, shape, or form. I have my little piece. I like to do my little piece. But if we don't know about you, let us know. You know what I mean? Because if you are not helping push your work forward, then you're part of the problem, I think, personally. I know that sounds really horrible.
Oh,
but
true.
if the organization... Yeah, if the organization that's put together to help you push your work forward or, you know, whatever. And you know what else we've done? We've organized writing groups for women horror writers.
Yes. You know what? I wanted to ask about that, but it kind of got...
we got sidetracked. It happens.
Sidetracked. But can you go into that a little bit? Because that's very interesting. I found that very interesting that you guys are doing that.
Well, so we were having a conversation about, you know, these writing groups because, you know, people have writing groups, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess, you know, where they have critique partners and stuff like that. And so Jen basically was like, you know, let's do that for women horror authors. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. So what we did was we set up different groups, you know, if you've published, if you've not published, and we're trying to get them to talk to each other and in a safe environment instead of it being like, you know, at your local horror writers like thing where you're kind of like face to face with somebody and they're critiquing your work. So it's just a safer space. What we wanted to put together was a safe space for women to be able to, you know, have critique partners to put their work out there and say, hey, this is my work, you know, and have other women read it and kind of critique it. And so that was the idea. And it's still open. It's still running. We kind of started out with a limited number, and then we're like, you know what? These groups run on their own at this point, so let's just open it up. So if you are interested, let me know, and I can get you in touch with the people.
Excellent. So where can where do people what's the website so that people can go and check this out?
It's actually off of the Ladies of Horror Fiction website.
Okay, cool.
So it's off of that blog. Yeah, it's the writing group. And if someone doesn't know, can't find it or something, you know, just hit me up on Twitter, Toni. It's at Toni_the_reader. I can get you to the right folks. And because we're only letting people in via email because we've had you know, there's always backlash on anything that you do. So we had a little bit of backlash, but whatever.
There's always those negative people who have to shit on everything.
Oh, I know, right? It's annoying. So annoying, I swear. You know, you try to do something awesome for everybody and it just doesn't work out. But you know what? The thing of it is, the cool thing is that, you know, we are seeing these women, you know, we are seeing women interacting with each other. And Jen is kind of like the overlord of that. That's not me. So we can get everybody.
She can be the overlord.
She can be the overlord. She's the overlord of the writing groups, and she kind of, you know, she pops in every once in a while, make sure everything's going okay and everything like that. But we kind of just let them run on their own because at the end of the day, you know, we wanted to put the groups together for them to be ran how the authors needed them to be ran. Because not every group is going to run the same or needs to run the same. Like, say you are a published author and you're getting ready to query a book, you have a different deadline to someone who hasn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, do you guys have any plans for the future that you haven't started yet, but like, you know, something like along the lines of writers groups and whatnot? What are the plans for the future of Ladies of Horror Fiction?
We have a lot of plans. I'm actually working on one of them now, as a matter of fact. We'd like to, because we do a lot of like giveaways, right? We do lots of giveaways and things like that. So we want to do more of those and more read-alongs. And, you know, we're working on a series of articles. And then I'm working on something specific to the podcast because, well, I can. And so... No, so I'm working on something, specific for the podcast that's in the works, and I'm hoping to have that up and running by October. And again, we're trying to do more collaborations with women that work in the horror industry, just in general. You know what I mean? We want to know why horror.
Yeah.
It's an interesting concept. Everybody has a different story. Everybody has a different type of thing. Some people read horror because they've seen, the worst in humanity, and the monsters in the books aren't as bad as people.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. So we're working through that. We're also doing like reviewers. We do a show us your shelf for the women horror reviewers. And yeah, so we got lots of, what's really important though. And I meant to talk about this on Behind the Door when I did a vlog podcast for Behind the Door for the Cray Rooms podcast. And I meant to say that we are running the LOHF awards this year.
Oh,
so we're doing book awards this year for women horror authors, and we need submissions.
All right.
So
is there a place?
Is
there a place I can like a link that I can put for that in the show notes?
Absolutely. You know what? I will send you the link for that for the show notes and stuff.
Excellent.
Yeah, because it's all there. I mean, mostly like the submission stuff is just coming to our email, and then I take care of it. But yeah, and we need, it's important for, if you're a woman horror author, to get in touch with us. If we don't know about you, let us know about you. Let us know about your work. Let us know what you're doing. I have some really, really cool interviews coming up. I'm so excited. I went to the Tucson Book Festival beginning of March. And I got to meet Linda Adson, and she's just amazing. And I'm so excited because, she said that she'd come on to our podcast.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. I'm so stoked. She wrote what is it?
Yeah, it's a very long
How to
title.
tell if your best. Yeah, it's super long. How to tell if your best friend's a demon.
A demon, yeah, or something like that. I talked to her for a different podcast, Great Lakes Horror Podcast. And I was talking to her because I think it was for the Stoker Awards a year or two ago for that podcast, and we were talking about that book because it won the Stoker, and it's an awesome book. I mean, it's like flash fiction mixed with poetry, and it's really awesome.
I love that book. I just reviewed it, and I loved it. She signed it for me and everything.
Yeah, but I can never remember the damn title.
Oh, I always just have to remember, how, like, in my head, I can totally picture it, like the cover of the book, and then the words are just kind of squished together.
Yeah.
But no, she's awesome. She's so awesome. And I get to talk to Yvonne Navarro as well. And, I'm super, super stoked. Yeah. I have so many really cool things coming up, and there's things that, like, I need to talk to other podcasters, and this might be something that we could talk about off record, but for some of the stuff that we have coming up in October, because, there's just amazing things happening, and horror is an amazing genre, and it's constantly changing, and there's so much really goodness coming out this year.
Yeah.
I'm so excited.
All right, so I think we've run out of time, but I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'd like to have you back on again in the future, especially if you have something big going on and you want to talk about it.
Absolutely.
I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
Pain has a face. Allow me to show it to you. Gentlemen, I am pain.
I see dead people. Hi, I'm Chucky. Wanna play?
When there is no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth.
So, shiver me timbers.
Oh, my lord. Leprechaun Returns.
This movie.
What would we have done without this movie?
I don't know. I don't think we could have lived much longer.
Oh.
All right.
Destined to be made.
So this movie, this movie is sort of jumping on the coattails of what Halloween did, and the basic concept is this is 25 years after the first movie, and the Leprechaun returns once again when a group of girls unwillingly awaken him while they're tearing down a cabin so that they can build a new sorority house. It was directed by Steven Kostanski. Written by Mark Jones, which actually is interesting because he was the first director of the first film, I think. Oh, no, it's just, he's just stated as creator. Sorry, they put it right beside the writer. Anyways, it was written by Suzanne Kiley, and it stars Taylor Spratler, Pepe Sanuga, and Cy Bennett, among others. I don't think I recognized anyone.
No.
I might have, but I doubt it. Anyways, yeah, so, Leprechaun. You know what's funny about this film is that we both watched Overlord and wanted to discuss that, but I was so disappointed in that film. I'm still willing to talk about this one.
Well, I had expectations for Overlord.
Yeah, me too. I mean,
exactly
they made it look like a monster movie, and it's not. It's just like super soldiers, and it's disappointing, man. Anyways, so Leprechaun Returns. So, like I said, they're taking the idea, as movies always do. They take other people's ideas quite blatantly too, and so this is basically like parts 2, 3, and 4 of Leprechaun doesn't exist, but part 1 does, or maybe, you know what, maybe they even do, because I don't think they really continued that storyline anyway. I can't really remember. But in my notes, I had to look that up on IMDb just to see what was going on, because I'm like, okay, obviously there's a backstory here, but what is the backstory? I don't remember there being a movie out recently. And I was like looking, and then when I was looking at some of the descriptions on IMDb for this movie, I was like, oh, okay, that's what they're doing. All right, that makes sense.
I have to trust in you for all of that, because I don't remember anything of the Leprechaun movies to have any kind of well,
that's
say
just
on
it.
the timeline.
I don't remember the first Leprechaun much either. I know it stars Jennifer Aniston, and she pretty much won't answer questions about it. I guess she just doesn't really want to acknowledge that she really did that on a professional level. But it was her first movie, and a lot of actors and actresses get their start that way. So I don't see what the big deal is. So
I know. Come on, Jen.
Yeah,
admit it.
Like, just
have a good laugh with us.
Exactly. That movie. What I do remember of that movie, I might have watched it had I known it was like connected to this one. I guess I should have, just with the title, but I don't know. Movies, you can't predict exactly what the title means, or if that's going to like transition into the story at all, or whatever. But anyways, this movie was interesting. Because I was surprised. Well, it's done by Lionsgate, right? So I guess they have some money to throw in. But they did a lot of if not all, practical effects, and that impressed me the most out of this movie, I think. Is that you get some pretty gory scenes, and you see like intestines, you see some pretty nasty things happening, and they don't shy away from the gore, and that's part of the fun of the film.
Yeah. That's definitely true. And I didn't really think about that, because the campiness, this is a very campy movie, and I think I kind of tuned out just a little bit.
Yeah.
just a little bit. But yeah. But you're right. I mean, for being a campy movie, they went heavy on the blood and stuff,
yeah,
which is very interesting to do.
Yeah.
That's a weird dichotomy to do.
And it looked good. It wasn't like like, it didn't necessarily look real for sure, but it was passable, and so I enjoyed that. That was definitely a positive for me, and might be the last positive. Now, I want to,
and I mean the practical effects. I mean, you're right. Those are always
very welcome.
Those are almost always better, really, in this kind of a situation. You know, there's, you know, the people that do this stuff for horror movies are real experts. They like all studied under Tom Savini.
Yeah. So that's a plus. And I want to, before, you know, I'm not going to, like, tear this movie a new asshole or anything like that. I mean, the movie has its problems, but I just want to say up front that I don't think it's a bad movie. It's just not a very good movie. And I think that was part of the plan. I mean, you go back to the first Leprechaun film, and it's not a good movie at all. It's just fun, right? It's just schlocky fun, and you don't watch it because you're going in for something serious. And this movie, I would say, it's sort of it's like a modern day sort of not really a retelling, but sort of like a retelling of the Leprechaun film. If those movies had started today, like, it's nothing
I didn't see that because I was expecting that, and that's something that I wrote in my notes, was that it really wasn't an updating, like, the way that they make things gritty nowadays. So I didn't see that.
But, you know, there comes this movie is weird. Like, the reason why I say it's updated, in a sense, is because the comedy is different. It's very much tongue-in-cheek, for the most part. They're playing with you, and in a way that you're sort of participating. It's almost, you know, they might as well every once in a while just stop and wink at you. You know what I mean? Like, see what we did there type thing. But, you know, there's other times where that comedy really didn't work, especially the first quarter to half a film. It's almost like they shot it in sequence or something, because it's very sloppy at the beginning. The acting is just awful.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
And the lines, like, the written lines are just awful. You know, it's not like you can just blame the actors. I don't think they had really good lines to work with. And I don't think necessarily they were directed very well. Like I said, in that first
I don't think
bit.
so either.
But about
the thing that I did...
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. What?
No, you go ahead.
The thing that made me really not like this movie was how formulaic it was.
Yes.
I mean, it doesn't need to be, you know, a horror fest. It can be campy and whatnot because it's a Leprechaun film. But it was just so formulaic. It was the girl stranded at the station and she's not being picked up. And it's the country bumpkin that's going to give her a ride. And it's the house in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And, there's a shower scene and the hands coming up to pull back the curtain. And it's like,
almost,
if it just were original with what was happening, I would gladly participate in a fun horror.
I felt it was almost naked in its formulaic.
Yeah.
I mean, because it's basically an 80s film, and I noted that too in my notes. I felt that I couldn't tell though, and that's, I think, the problem. This felt almost like an ode to 80s film, except it wasn't an ode to 80s horror films. You know what I mean? Like,
I do.
I was watching it and I was like, this would have fit in the 80s, but it's, I don't know, it's hard for me to explain, but I don't think that was necessary. Maybe it was their intention, but there was nothing else. There was no other substance to connect it to the 80s, except for the fact that they made an 80s film. And they had a lot of fun. You could tell that they were having fun with it, especially near the end. But so yeah, it's definitely formulaic. But you know what? I think the acting, to go back to that quickly, I think it did get better from about halfway to closer to the end. I don't know if it's because maybe they were just having more fun with it, maybe they were just more comfortable, or what, but, you know...
They don't have to tell a story and make characters anymore, whereas in roughly the first half, they had to establish who they were and connections and relationships. That's what I saw. Yeah. And so that didn't work. It was limited in like in every way, from the writing to the acting. No offense to the actors, they did an earnest job. But when it got to be action and they're running around, it just was a better fit.
Yeah.
With the talent.
And it became more entertaining too.
Yeah.
You know what? They give the characters one thing. They at least all had their own character. It's just nobody acts that way. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. And they have the stereotype. Oh, this is the one who, this is the chick that drinks all the time and doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, I do. Like, I did enjoy the hangover scene though. Where she's like she's the only one who's hungover because she's the only one who got really smashed. You can tell that she's a bit of a drunk, and she's like throwing up into a bin.
Yeah.
And then she has that conversation with like their sorority boss or whatever, and she's like, "Are you hungover?" And she's giving her shit, and I just found that conversation funny. So, there's not really all that much more to talk about this film because it's, as I said, it's pretty naked as to what it is. It's straightforward. You've seen this movie, even if you haven't, and
that's a great tagline for it.
Yeah.
You've seen this movie,
even if you haven't.
Perfect,
because it steals from so many other movies, and the plot is just something that's been told over and over again. They did change things up here and there, but it's very, very typical. Overall, though, you know what? I kind of enjoyed it anyway. I didn't hate it. At first, I thought I was going to hate it. I was like, oh my god, what the hell is this? But once it got going, I was like, okay, I'm having fun, so there's that, right? And so, yeah, what are your final thoughts, Michael?
Well, I had trouble getting past the formulaicness, but getting into, like the action and everything, what stunned me was how even the characters in the movie weren't scared when the leprechaun showed up. Yeah. And they would just have a conversation with him. Yeah, they weren't even, she took a selfie with him. Yeah, okay, she was drunk. But then the guy, was just talking. And then they would go and they'd, be screaming at, like a jump scare, when something crashes, like when the pitchfork falls. But then when he would show up, they'd be like, so, what do you want? Oh, I'd like that.
Yeah, the selfie thing was funny. It had me laughing. But it made me wonder what exactly they're trying... Like, okay, obviously, they're trying to be funny. But are they trying to make a statement, too? Like, has this where we've sort of deteriorated to? Where you get, like, the killer who shows up and they're going to kill you and you want to get a selfie before, the business starts?
I really don't think it was that meta. I didn't sense that. I just didn't. Like that one movie we reviewed, The Final Girls?
Yeah.
Was that it? Where they stepped in the movie screen and they were in a 1983 horror?
Yeah.
Yeah. That was meta.
Yeah, that was definitely meta. That's like like I was saying, that's sort of my problem with this movie. It's like they should have. I don't know what they were trying to do exactly with it, other than maybe just make a fun horror movie. I think they actually
made an 80s movie.
Yeah, I think that's what they did.
Just made it in earnest.
Yeah. So what do you rate it?
Production values, give it a 2-star.
Cool. I'm going to go all out and give it 5 whole stars. No, I'm going to give it 3 stars. I'm going to give it 3 stars because of the production. I loved the production, and ultimately it was fun. I wasn't bored, so 3 stars. I think it's a solid 3 stars for me.
That's very generous.
It is, because you know what? It's not a good movie by any means, but I think this movie would be good if you're hanging out with friends and you want to watch something really stupid, and you're having.
It would be good for sorority and fraternity.
Exactly.
People.
Yeah.
If you put it in,
it's a perfect movie for that. It's not really. If you're looking for something serious, stay clear.
Yep. It's perfect to have on in the background, and
Yeah. All right, so we're gonna take
It's the first movie of a sleepover.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, that would work too. All right, so we're gonna take a quick break, and when we return, we're gonna close out the show.
Yay!
Yay! You know what? Overlord did bore me. Aside from the beginning, I liked the battle scene at the beginning.
I couldn't get over the black paratrooper sergeant.
Yeah, because
sorry,
that wouldn't have existed.
I wish that our history were better, but that didn't exist. It was anachronistic. I couldn't get over it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it was. I guess they were just trying to be diverse, but if you're trying to also be historically accurate, I give them, full compliments for trying to be diverse, but you probably could put a character like that somewhere else.
And the thing is, I was distracted for about 15 to 20 minutes into it, thinking that and having that debate in my head that, well, this probably isn't trying to be historically accurate, and they cast it with diversity, and that should be applauded. And then, but I'm taken out of the movie because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So I was like 20 minutes behind anyway.
Yeah, but I did like the action scene while they're doing the drop-off. It was kind of like, it's a little overdone, like when the plane's getting all shot up. I don't think that anyone would have survived that. It wouldn't cut down the middle that straight, you know what I mean? Everyone in there probably would have been butchered. But,
Well, once you've seen Band of Brothers, I think anything that tries to talk about that operation is, it just pales.
Yeah, in comparison,
I'm not
for
gonna
sure.
like it.
You're not Steven Spielberg, people. Just don't even try.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is terribly unfair to me, but...
Well, Steven Spielberg has made some ripples lately with his Netflix point of view and in regards to the Oscars. But aside from that stupidness, he is a brilliant filmmaker. If he wants to make something look real, then he can do it. Even if it's not real. He can make you believe that it's real. And
he is really fucking good.
Yeah, not too many other people can do that. So there you go. Anyways, if you guys enjoyed our discussion and the discussion that we had with Toni from from the Women of Horror Fiction podcast and their website, definitely go visit them and see. They have a directory. We were talking about this directory too, and it's just full of women writers. And I was stunned when I saw how big this list is. It's huge. Go check that out. Maybe find some new female horror writers, because everyone's in there. And as Toni was saying, if you're not on that list, reach out to them. And of course, if you're a horror writer, reach out to them and get your name put on that list, because they want to know. Every horror writer who's out there who has books out, let them know. And they will do that for you. All right, so if you want to get a hold of us, it's real easy to do. We have an email account that's actually being used. It's kind of strange, but you can reach us at darknessdwellspodcast@mail.com. You can also reach us on Twitter. We have an account there. The handle for that is @darkdweller74. There's a website. Go to www.wheredarknessdwells.com and check things out there. We're also we're moving hosts, but the website's going to remain the same, and you're still going to be able to find the podcast there. But you can find us now on Spreaker, and we have a hell of a lot more space there to keep episodes. So check us out there. And we're also on Spotify now, which is awesome.
Yes, indeed.
Do you use Spotify at all, Michael?
No. No, but I want to because I hear a lot of things, but I'm too old. I don't
bet
have time.
I
to
bet you
discover
that you
everything.
have records or something like that, or CDs, right?
Not anymore, but I did.
Ah.
But I did.
How do you
I
listen to
lost
your
them
music?
in-
How do you listen to your
terrible
music?
story. I have. It's all digital. It's
Ah.
all on. I don't know what format.
Oh, I know
it's
what
all
you're talking
MP3s
about.
or whatever.
Yeah.
It's all It's
Cool.
all on my computer and Pandora.
But you don't have to, I don't think you have to be a member of Spotify to listen to, our podcast there. So definitely check us out there, and iTunes, of course. Please leave us a review. And we have quite a few guests lined up, so stay tuned. Family emergencies and cutting fingers aside, we will be back in 2 weeks.
We'll try to keep it busy.
Yeah. So we'll talk to you. Thanks for listening, everyone. We will talk to you again soon.
Stay dark, my friends.
Stay dark indeed.